Hey guys, it's Weeb Union, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Russia's geopolitics through their geography. I split Russia into three main parts: the North European Plain, Siberia, and the Arctic. Now, how do I define these three things? First is the North European Plain. It actually goes all the way down to France, but I didn't bother, as this is the important part. As you can see, it's a very wide area for Russia. These are all plains. It's a very difficult place to defend, especially when it's this wide. So the goal for Russia geopolitically is to make this gap as small as possible. How would they do that? By going further west. They currently have Belarus tied to them economically and politically, but the Baltics are in NATO and Ukraine they are at war with. This leaves a huge front line, which is even bigger than if they didn't have Belarus. But if they want to make this smaller, to defeat the Baltics, they'd have to go through the Suwalski Gap, which would cut off the Baltics from the rest of NATO and leave the Russians with a much smaller front line. And then by taking Ukraine as well, they reach down to the Carpathian Mountains. And then there's a small gap here and this gap here, which they will have to protect, which is much smaller than what we see here. So Russia is forced by its geography to go as west as possible, at least until Poland. Which explains why Ukraine is so vital to their defense politics. And then we see here as well that Moldova and a part of Romania is actually also important to them. If NATO soldiers just went up here, then the whole point of Carpathian Mountains in the south gives no sense. They need to go up to the gap and defend that gap. Now, in the Black Sea, as we know, NATO controls all of these countries, which means they can just go into the Black Sea uncontested, which is why Crimea is so important, as the defensive weapons that Russia uses, like the S-400, S-500, their military rockets and so on, Iskander and so on, they all have a range that covers all of the Black Sea, but from Crimea. If they had to do it from Anapa or Rostov, they wouldn't have the range for all of the Black Sea, but now they do. Also, it has a warm water sea port, which allows them to use this port all year round. The only issue is that if they, for example, want to ship with China, they would have to go through the Bosphorus Strait and the Suez Canal, which is two money cutters. They each take their share, which leaves Russia with much less money than what it otherwise could get from shipping from Vladivostok, for example. But Vladivostok is frozen half the time, so it doesn't bring the same benefits as a warm water seaport, which is also why they like going west. The further west they go, the warmer the seas. We also have St. Petersburg as a very important port, as it is their main port for their navy, as well as for their shipment they ship through Denmark Strait. But they also have Kaliningrad, which is a military base, as it isn't that easy to transfer a lot of goods there, but there's still a lot of shipments that go from Kaliningrad as well. However, the military significance of Kaliningrad is that it is a fortress. It is made so that if Russia and NATO goes to war, they will be able to hold until Russian soldiers come and close this gap and take all the Baltics. So it's a very fortified fortress of a quote-unquote country, more an enclave. Now, as for the south, there are three gaps in the Caucasus Mountains. There's this one at the center, which goes through South Ossetia. Then there's this one in the left that goes to Abkhazia, and then this final one around Azerbaijan. Now, you may notice that I said South Ossetia and Abkhazia, not Georgia, and that is because Russia, knowing its geography, made sure to control these gaps instead of leaving it in a country that may join NATO, as they announced they wanted to during 2008, which is why we saw the invasion for Russia to make sure that they have control of these gaps across the Caucasus Mountains. Now, the last one around Azerbaijan is not an issue as long as Azerbaijan continues to be quote unquote neutral. So for now, it's not an issue, but if Azerbaijan suddenly starts talking about joining NATO as well, then we will see Russia going to take control of this gap. Luckily for them, it is. They could even avoid going to war because it's so at their border, and they can just control most of it instead of the beginning of it. So for this is much easier than the Georgian gaps, so they shouldn't worry about this. This weird looking line is the Eurasian Divide, and it connects also to the Ural Mountains. So anything that's right of this is Asia, anything that's left of it is Europe. So most of Russia is considered Europe. As for the Arctic has been differentiated from the North European plain because no one can invade during 90% of the time because of how cold it is. But it also represents the Russian Arctic ambition, as there's the Russian country, Republic, Federation, has decided to have their own place in the Arctic for the natural resources, for security issues, and so on. So they have a heavy focus on the Arctic, and they have a specific Arctic fleet, as well as defending the White Sea from an invasion that 1 out of 10 times is possible. And also from Finland, who now wants to join NATO, it is important for them to always have stationed troops in the area. And it presents a new security threat for Russia. Now, as for Central Asia, there are no significant areas for anyone to launch an invasion. If in case they go at war with India, which is highly unlikely, as Russia has focused a lot of political and economic power on putting India on its own side, rather than the West between their conflict. If we compare India with China, then of course they will side with the West, but India and Russia are good pals, if you can say so. They've sold a lot of weapons, and they have received, they have a lot of economic deals. So it's highly unlikely that they even will be invaded from the south. But even if they did, they have this huge area of mountains and deserts that they'll have to go through and have supply lines through, which makes an invasion basically impossible. Now, what is Siberia like? Siberia is a frozen forest year round. That's what it is, which is also why this is highly unlikely for anyone to go through. Imagine having to go through 10,000 kilometers of frozen forest before you actually see civilization and have someone to fight. If anyone invades from the east, it would be China to take this small area here, which it did historically have during the Qing Empire. However, as we see it today, it is very unlikely for China to invade and take this from Russia. There are two main reasons for this. The first one is that China and Russia are strategic allies in the sense that they have a common enemy, and they are economically intertwined, as China has manufacturing but needs natural resources. Russia has natural resources and needs manufacturing. So they are heavy trade partners and strategic allies. Now, the second reason is Russia's demographics. Russia is a huge country with 144 million people. China is smaller than Russia with 1.4 billion people. So there's 1 to 10 difference. If China just keeps doing as they're doing right now, and that is to immigrate to Russia, where they immigrate to Vladivostok and so on, they will eventually outnumber the Russians, and they will have economic and political influence in the area, despite it not being part of China. And if that continues, maybe in a century, they'll be basically a pseudo part of China. So why sacrifice a political and a strategic ally in exchange for a little part of land that will eventually be yours anyways, if they wait for long enough? And as everyone says, China is playing for the long game. There's no reason for China to sacrifice anything right now, as they are in it for the long game. They're only going to grow stronger. Now, I would like to explain how I split this up. I played with a few rules. The first one is that every country needs buffer zones. And that is meant by the fact that if every country has to put troops around all of their borders all the time, it'll be too exhausting for that power, especially one like Russia that is so vast. If they had to put troops on this whole front line, even 2 million or 3 million won't be enough. That is why they are forced by their geography to find natural barriers that will allow them to slack off on the military preparedness. But the natural geography of Russia has shaped its political and identity as a country, as it makes people see how important the military is. As if you own a country that vast and that rich in natural resources, other countries are bound to invade you because they want that vast area and resources, just like World War II, where they wanted living space and so on. It's the natural course of human history and identity. So by living in living a life where anyone wants to invade you because of what you have, you start to appreciate the ones that defend you, which is why Russia has such a militaristic identity. As well as if Russia has a president, that president's popularity is based on how well their military is performing. That's why when we saw Russia seizing Crimea, the Georgian invasion, and now the invasion in Ukraine, Putin's approval rating has skyrocketed every single time. Even though that there are economic repercussions and so on, it proves that he is willing and able to defend Russia as a country, which is enough for them, as that's what they need. They want a leader who doesn't back down when they are faced with a fight that they can win. Now, that's all for my video. Hope you enjoyed and have a great day. Thanks for watching. And remember to subscribe so you get notified of my videos in the future.